as an artist, you said that was not your expertise, really, like what mics to use, etc. Maybe, but what do you feel the not the engineer should do, but what does the engineer do to make you feel more relaxed? Like, has there been some good examples? Maybe in even JJ's case.
Well, I say like I've worked with a lot of. I've maybe had one bad experience on one record, which I won't name, with an engineer that we never saw eye to eye. I mean, I didn't like the way anything sounded, and he was very, aggressive about what he wanted. And I'm like, so that record to me to this day, I listen to it, I'm like, oh. But other than that, all the other engineers I've ever worked with, and I've recorded in Germany, Holland, Nashville now, Chicago, Boston, and the engineers are like usually like some very um like they want it to make you feel comfortable. They want to get on your page. Like they're very accommodating and relaxed and sympathetic, and sometimes they'll come up with ideas and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Like I think they're like musicians in the sense that they're contributing so much to everything, to the performance, to the atmosphere, to and then in the end you'll hear it in the product. But most engineers are really interesting people, and people I enjoy being around. So with in this case, in this album, it was mostly Joe and him that were communicating, and I was kind of, sitting back, listening to them talk about how to do things and what they want. And sometimes JJ would be like, "Man, really, you want that? You want it like that?" And Joe's like, "Yeah, I want it like that." So he'd be like, "Okay, Joe," because it was like a lot of old-fashioned kind of over-the-top things bleeding into each other. Everything wasn't baffled. It was and so JJ had a lot in his hands because it wasn't like a clean recording per se, and Joe wanted it like that. So JJ was like, "Oh, I don't usually do things like this," but he did it, and
Cool.
so it was interesting to watch the two of them interact.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can imagine. I mean, they're both
Yeah.
awesome. And
Mm-hmm.
do you usually let the producer and engineer take not control? That's not the word, but do you usually sit back and listen, or do you usually have a hands-on approach?
This is the first record since my first two albums. So since 1992 that I have not been hands on. Every record since then I've been like right there making every decision, with the engineer and the producer.
Wow.
And the last two I produced myself. So usually me and the engineer would really work closely because I was sort of like my own producer. So this is the first time I did that. And I mean, that was from the get-go. Joe told me, "Hey, I want you to trust me." And I'm like, "I trust you. I will trust you. Trust me." So that's how it was interesting for me. But what was great about it was, I mean, it could have been a disaster if it was something that I didn't really like. I thought about that. I'm like, wow, what if I get in the studio and I'm gonna let Joe do what he does because I respect him so much. But what if we don't see eye to eye? But we ended up seeing eye to eye, so it ended up being a really easy, fun, and wonderful experience. I had nothing bad. There was no tension. There was no negativity. There's no arguing. Everything really flowed well.